Hey everybody! So I hope you all had a really great Friday. It's that time again that I feel compelled to sit in front of a webcam and read from a book and talk about some things. So think on this for a second. Even if your meat came from an actual organic farm, where the animal was living happy in the sunshine, eating grass, stretching its legs, getting to flap its wings, bask in the sun, and wasn't being fed food made from their own feces or from other dead animals. How clean and sanitary were the slaughterhouses that were packing the meat? Has anyone thought about that? So even if your stuff was organic and it wasn't being, and the animals were not being fed hormones and antibiotics and all this stuff, feeding, did you know that they feed these animals other dead animals? Cannibalism? I mean, it's pretty gross. I don't know. Anyways, so yeah. So just think about it. Just because your meat supposedly came from a happy animal, and when you start doing your research on slaughterhouses, it's disgusting. It is really frightening. And we'll get to that part. I mean, I will tell you guys about the slaughterhouses. It's awful. But anyways, so when I was a little girl, I used to love going to my grandparents every school break I could. Every summer break. My grandparents used to have cattle and chickens and turkeys. And I loved hugging on the baby cows, and I really loved pushing the chickens around in my baby buggy, and I spent the whole summer doing that. And I've always loved animals, but it did not connect, it did not click for me until just a few years ago. So there was something written, and it was in 2001, the Washington Post printed an article by Joby Warwick entitled, "They Die Piece by Piece." Warwick explained how though cattle were supposed to be dead before reaching the cutting room, this was often not the reality. Raymond Moreno, a slaughterhouse worker who had spent 20 years as a second legger, cutting hocks off carcasses as they sped past at the rate of 309 per hour, described the process to Warwick. "They blink, they make noises," he said softly. "The head moves, the eyes are wide and looking around." Still, Moreno would cut. On bad days, he says, dozens of animals reached his station, clearly alive and conscious. Some would survive, as far as the tail cutter, the belly ripper, and the hide puller. "They die," said Moreno, "piece by piece." You know, I can't even imagine, you know, like, I can't imagine how, I just don't understand how these facilities do not, how they do this to these animals alive. I mean, is this where they get Texas Chainsaw movies? I mean, seriously, where they skin people alive because they're doing this to animals? I mean, it's been proven that they feel, all animals feel pain. You know? Bird brains, chickens, and turkeys. In Chapter 2, I discussed some of the common assumptions we make about pigs and how these beliefs make it easier for us to eat them. Many of us feel even more removed from chickens and turkeys, at least in part because of our deep-rooted belief that they are stupid, perhaps too stupid to even know whether they are in pain. Why would anyone think that? I mean, are you stupid? I mean, come on. We all feel pain. All life feels pain. Sorry, it just really upsets me. Anyways, okay, so however, birds are actually quite smart. Scientists now acknowledge that these animals are vastly more intelligent than they've ever realized. Chickens and turkeys are also quite sociable, which may explain the growing trend of keeping them as pets. Owners describe birds who play with them, seek them out for affection, and even cavort with the family dog. There are also websites dedicated exclusively to bird ownership. For instance, at mypetchicken.com, enthusiasts can purchase such paraphernalia as a $495 urban chicken coop, which comes in 5 different colors, and proud owners can post pictures of their favorite chickens for all to admire. You know, anybody who owns a bird can tell you that these animals are smart. I mean, I don't know. It's just people. Gosh. Okay. So nevertheless, in the United States, we kill and consume approximately 9 billion birds a year for their flesh or eggs. Broiler chickens and turkeys are raised for their meat, and though in natural conditions they live up to 10 years, in CAFOs they have a lifespan of 7 weeks or 16 weeks, respectively, which means that whenever we consume poultry, we are in fact eating baby birds. The birds' severely shortened lifespan is due to their being fed a diet full of growth-promoting drugs, that they grow at a rate that's the equivalent of a human reaching 349 pounds by the age of 2 years old. For this reason, meat birds suffer from numerous structural deformities. Their legs are unable to hold their weight and are often twisted and broken. They cannot move much due to chronic joint pain, and when it comes time to be shipped to slaughter, as they are grabbed and crammed into crates, they are stacked on top of one another. They can suffer broken or dislocated wings, hips, and legs, as well as internal hemorrhages. Meat birds spend their lives in barren sheds or broiler houses that may hold 50,000 birds and be so crowded it is difficult to see the floor. In these conditions, they are unable to carry out any of their natural behaviors, such as foraging and roosting. And the birds develop psychotic, stress-induced behaviors, such as feather pecking and cannibalism. Well, of course. Who wouldn't develop psychotic behaviors living in those conditions? Can you imagine? Put yourself in that position. And you'd go mad. We're eating, well, I'm not anymore, but people are eating diseased, psychotic, sick birds. Kind of makes you wonder if that's why people are so crazy in the world now. Often, in order to prevent the birds from pecking each other to death, a hot blade is used to cut off the front part of their beaks without anesthesia at birth. This procedure, known as debeaking, can lead to infection, the growth of neurological tumors, or death if the bird doesn't have enough of a beak left to use for drinking or eating. The birds that survive the broiler house are then sent to slaughter in poultry slaughterhouses, where production speeds are even faster than those for other animals. The average is 8,400 animals per hour. Birds are thrown into conveyors where they are grabbed, sometimes handfuls of them at a time, and hooked upside down on shackles, while the humane methods of slaughter act requires other animals to be rendered unconscious before being killed. Birds are exempt and are slaughtered while fully conscious. Their throats are slit by either hand or by machine, and they are then dumped into scalding water to loosen their feathers. A number of birds end up being boiled alive. Josh Balk, an activist who had worked undercover at a Purdue chicken slaughter plant in 2004 before becoming a director at the Humane Society of the United States, spoke with me about his experience at the plant. He also videotaped and published his accounts of the experience, in particular the workers' ongoing aggression toward the birds. Balk kept a daily log, and the following are excerpts. Nearly every chicken responded with screams and violent physical reactions from the moment they were grabbed by workers, and as they went through the line. The screaming of the birds and the frenzied flapping of their wings were so loud that you had to yell to the worker next to you, who was standing less than 2 feet away, just so he could hear you. I saw an employee kick a chicken off the floor fan and routinely saw chickens being thrown around the room. While one of the workers was talking about football, he spiked a chicken onto the conveyor belt, pretending he had scored a touchdown. I saw about 50 birds being dumped from the transport crates onto the conveyor belt, a distance of approximately 8 feet. The crate tipped them all at once, so they fell on top of each other. The screaming was intense during the whole process. I looked onto the conveyor belt and could clearly see chickens with broken legs and wings, limbs sticking out in unnatural angles. I noticed that our line leader seemed generally more hostile towards the birds today, even yelling profanities at them when he threw them. During one break, a worker repeatedly slapped a chicken in the face until the line started again. There were so many dead birds on the floor of the hanging room that it was difficult to take a step without stepping on one. As with other species destined for human consumption, the American public is shielded from witnessing the lives and deaths of some 9 billion chickens per year. As Balk explained, being there firsthand, to hear the screams and to smell the stench of death in the air is something that most people would never experience. Can they suffer? Calling for the humane treatment of animals, 17th century philosopher Jeremy Bentham argued, the question is not can they reason nor can they talk, but rather can they suffer. The question of sentience, the ability to feel pleasure and pain, has been at the center of arguments surrounding both humans and animal welfare. Historically, members of vulnerable groups have been believed to have higher tolerance for pain, an assumption often invoked to justify suffering. For instance, 15th century scientists would nail dogs to boards by their paws in order to cut them open and experiment on them while fully conscious, and they dismissed the dog's howling as simply a mechanical response, as little different from the noise of a clock whose springs have been struck. Similarly, until the early 1980s, American doctors performed major surgery on infants without using painkillers or anesthetic. The baby's cries were explained as mere instinctive reactions, and because African slaves were thought to feel less pain than whites, it was easier to justify the brutal experience of slavery. Because the experience of pain is subjective, it is easy to argue against the suffering of another. In other words, since we aren't inside another's body, we can only assume what he or she may be feeling. And if we have a vested interest in assuming that he or she is not in pain, it is all too easy to believe this to be true. Our assumptions stem from our beliefs, and the very belief systems that enable us to inflict suffering on others actively work to keep themselves alive. So it is no wonder that we don't err on the side of caution or reason when it comes to carnistic practices that cause animals pain. It's just horrible. It's just really horrible. It is ironic that so many of our cute animal pictures on cards and calendars, on posters, contain photos of newly born chicks, when every year millions of these baby birds are treated in ways that most of us wouldn't imagine. Layer hens are birds used for egg production. They are born in commercial hatcheries, in industrial incubators. The male chicks are of no economic value and are therefore discarded shortly after birth. They can be dumped into a massive grinder and ground up alive, gassed, or thrown into garbage bins where they die from suffocation or dehydration. The female chicks are stuffed into battery cages, which are wire cages that hold an average of 6 birds and are about the size of a square filing cabinet. Hens spend their entire lives in battery cages, where they must eat, sleep, and defecate, and where they cannot even open their wings. The bottom of the cages are made of wire, so the birds' droppings can fall through the openings, and their limbs can easily become entangled in the mesh. The wires on the sides and tops of the cages scrape off the bird's feathers and cause bruises, and some hens neurotically rub their chests against the cage until they are bald and bleeding. Battery cages are considered so cruel that they have been banned in a number of countries, though they remain widely used throughout the United States. Because the hens have been genetically manipulated to lay 10 times as many eggs as their ancestors, their brittle bones frequently break, and the calcium in their skeletons is disproportionately diverted to eggshell formation. Another consequence of this artificial selection to lay unnaturally large numbers of eggs is uterine prolapse. When an egg gets stuck against the uterine wall, it can pull the uterus out with it. Unless the uterus is pushed back into the hen's body, other hens will peck at it until she bleeds to death or dies of infection. In each case, it usually takes 2 days for the hen to die. When they can no longer produce eggs profitably, the hens are pulled out of their cages, sometimes several in a handful, and their limbs, which are weakened and ensnared in the wires, often tear. When she is just over 1 year old, the layer hen is sent to slaughter. Death by wood chipper, humane or insane. In 2003, the LA Times reported that workers at an egg ranch in San Diego fed squirming birds by the bucket into a wood chipper, then turned the mashed remains with dirt and heaped the mixture into piles. According to the Times, veterinarian Greg Cutler, a member of the Animal Welfare Committee of the American Veterinary Medical Association, authorized the procedure. Prior to the incident, Cutler had been in attendance of a meeting of poultry ranchers discussing how to deal with chickens during an outbreak of Newcastle disease and a viral infection. Cutler told Times that no idea was too crazy. We are in desperation trying to deal with the disease. But the 30,000 hens that were being tossed into the woodchopper in San Diego were not infected with Newcastle disease. They had simply stopped producing eggs. Still, according to one of the ranch owners, Cutler and other veterinarians approved the procedure and called it humane. Charges were not pressed against Cutler, and though the San Diego District Attorney's Office investigated the ranch to assess for animal cruelty, they concluded that there are no evidence of criminal intent on the part of the owners who were just following professional advice. You know, it's really, really sad that we're allowing this. You know, other countries are putting a stop to the violence, and other countries are realizing, you know, that it's wrong, but yet the United States is allowing this. And there's some really important stuff that people should know. And, you know, I'll read that on another time and share it because this video is getting way too long. But I really, really, really feel that everybody should read this book. And I know most people don't care, which is sad. But wouldn't you want to know? Wouldn't you want to know that your food is tortured, abused, being fed its own waste, being fed other dead animals that have been diseased and infected? Wouldn't you want to know that what you're eating has been diseased and contaminated? Even if you cook it, you're still getting some of that junk in your food. And it talks about numerous outbreaks of meat that had to be recalled, and it had to be recalled a few times because of unsanitary slaughterhouse procedures. And I mean, it just makes me ill. So I really feel like things can change. And I really feel like if we all stand together and be conscious of what is going on and we choose wisely and we actually care, that we can make a difference. I know we can. We just have to care. And anyways, I've read too much, talked too much, and this girl needs to get some rest. So I will talk to you guys later. Love you guys. Bye.